Hi, everyone, and welcome to Baywa RE's third Solar Town Hall. We're glad you could join us. A reminder to folks, if you're watching this in your browser window, you'll only see me during the whole town hall. So if I'd recommend you log out and then log back in using the Zoom app. It only takes a second, so please do that now. A few notes on at the top here. Baywa RE and UNIRAC have partnered together to offer solar contractors free permitting design services through May 15th, 2020. You can go to permits at unirac.com to find out more, and we'll put the links in our town hall follow-up email as well. So again, that's UNIRAC Design Services with partnership through Baywa, and those are available till May 15th, 2020. And make sure to check out our COVID resource page at solar-distribution.com. We've got business assistance and other industry resources on there, as well as links to upcoming town halls and our mindfulness session. And the next mindfulness session is this Friday at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. And you can find links to those events at the COVID resource page for all of that. Finally, if you need anything, just let us know. Baywa is here for you. This is a challenging time, but our team is available if you need anything. So please get in touch. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. We'll be talking with a number of solar contractors about remote selling and other virtual aspects of the solar business. We didn't have a lot of time last week for live audience questions, but this week we're making more room for that. So please, as we go, if you have questions for the panelists, just add them to the chat. There was a lively chat last week and a lot of questions got answered there, but we'll have kind of a free-form discussion as we go. So add your questions to the chat window, and you can also tweet your questions at hashtag #SolarTownHall, excuse me. So I would like to kick off the town hall today and bring up David Dunlap. He's going to give an update on Baywa's operational status and also answer a supply question. David, thanks for joining us and take it away.
Thanks, Tom. I'm very happy to announce that no changes in terms of our complete open for business, full operations across our warehouses, our carrier network, and all of our staff still available by phone and email, all working remotely and available. We have noticed a few local jurisdictional issues with deliveries. Certain carriers, even some of the parcel carriers, having difficulty reaching their actual delivery contact or the address if they're in a highly restricted area, but the services are running. So we may be reaching out to you and asking for maybe a backup contact, for instance, to make sure that appointments can be set or the deliveries can be met in person, but everything is working. All areas are operational.
Great. Thanks, David. Before we let you go, you've had a lot of conversations with manufacturer partners, and the feedback you're getting is there is no immediate supply concern. Supply looks really solid through Q3 and Q4. David Chang from LG was on the show last week, and he reiterated those sentiments. But interestingly, we are getting questions about supply concerns from our partners and others. Can you give us any insight? What is driving that concern? And just to reiterate, we don't have any supply issues through the end of 2020, right?
Correct. I believe we're all collectively in good shape, and certainly Baywa is in great shape in terms of available inventory today, and the outlook is great through the end of the year. I would be interested in the conversation today for people to provide some of their local input or cases where they're feeling insecure. And I think what we need to do is be clear about whether we're talking about availability right now in the moment. Some of the electrical distributors that have had to close their doors for their local brick and mortar shops or have gone to will call only, there may be a difference in terms of the experience of being able to just drive to a location and pick it up versus planning a little bit further in advance to make sure it's available. So I want to make sure that we're addressing concerns of that nature, as well as the sort of forward-looking concern. If people are more worried about having available supply in June, say, when they're anticipating being back up and running with the full crews, and will I have product then? I think a good quick analogy is thinking about the toilet paper concern, right? If your local store had a weekly truckload delivery of toilet paper that was pretty much keeping pace with the regular demand, and all of a sudden this week, people buy 2 or 3 times as much as normal, that store is going to be out before the end of the week. It doesn't mean that there isn't another truck coming next week. And of course, they're going to be looking at, do I now bring in 2 trucks a week, or do I just bring in a truck every 5 days and try and smooth out that roll as we react? The more complicated the supply chain, the longer some of those reactions are, but we are just trying to smooth out those bumps in the road. So that's where good communication, being clear about whether we're talking about an immediate concern, I need product here today and you're out, so I'm concerned, or, is it related to the planning? But I do think that, right now, most of the solar distribution channel is kind of delaying inbounds or canceling some immediate orders and trying to spread them out into later in Q2 and into Q3. That should provide for a smooth transition through what we anticipate being a little bit of a shortage from Southeast Asia on the module side in that same time frame. I think the current inventory should hold us through if we don't go crazy and try and blow it all out and then allow that gap to come later.
Okay, great. Thanks for those thoughts, David.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. And if customers have questions, please add them to the chat window. So now I would like to switch tracks a little bit and pull up Boaz Seufer. And Boaz, before we get to the main topic, I was hoping you could give us a market update. The solar outlook last week felt optimistic, though definitely tough times ahead. But how are you feeling this week? What are you wrestling with as you try to steer the BayWa ship? Maybe let's start with that and then talk about your market update.
Sure. So I think I talked, I'm not sure if it was last week or the week before, about seeing kind of the response effort in 1 week chunks. And I think that was a little optimistic. I'm now thinking about it in 2 week chunks. So first there's the getting organized, and then starting to execute in terms of crisis response. And so a lot of you, I'm sure, are doing the same things we are, right? You're developing scenarios, and you're developing methods to keep those scenarios up to date. And then you're probably responding to those scenarios and developing methods for those responses. And I want to emphasize methods because we have to cycle these activities, having a method and knowing who owns what step and all those things are really important. You probably have daily dashboards. You probably have weekly dashboards of, data that you need to look at in order to keep your scenarios updated and drive actions. So we're pretty much in that condition now. We obviously always have kinks to work out and improve those methods. But now I think it's time, even though it's really difficult to do it, to take your COVID response team and get it running independently so that you can then have a plan ahead team that's thinking about where is the industry going to be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now, and look at the commonalities across your scenarios and make some design choices about how you want to meet the industry where it's going to be, and how you want to meet society where it's going to be. And I think it's early to do that, but it will also be too late to do that before we know it, right? So I think some of the early indicators that are coming out, that, things you want to keep in mind about your go forward strategy, your planning ahead, are how are people relating to resilience, and is energy resilience part of that? Is distancing going to continue to be part of how we operate post-COVID? How might financing change, or does it need to change, right? On one hand, tax equity is devolving, right, as consumer tax appetite is probably being reduced. But at the same time, it's possible leasing and PPA companies might have trouble raising tax equity too. So there's a tension there, and thinking about how consumers are going to want to finance solar in the future might be important. That's a little tactical. I want to try to get to kind of the macro trends that are emerging and see if we can design for that.
Okay. Did you want to add a market update in there?
Yeah, I think this is going to be different from for each of our customer contractors, depending on where in the country they are. So I can provide kind of a meta view that aggregates that together, and that's useful in ways. Green Tech Media is basically saying the best case scenario for Q2 in residential is about 250 megawatts nationally. And that's down from about 600 last year and down from a forecast of about 700. So that's a 55% cut or so for Q1. And then over the rest of the year, basically, they're saying 2020 is going to be down between 16 and 34% compared to 2019 in residential. We have talked to several hundred customers and asked them how their business is performing today compared to last year. And we've also talked with all of our manufacturer partners who all talk to analysts, and we talk to analysts, and we get some feedback from them as well. And if we average all of that together, it basically looks like Q2 is down 50% from 2019. And then there are different scenarios for Q3 and Q4, really depending on, we have to model two different events. One is the public health crisis and its impact on our simple ability to install. And then there's an economic recovery phase that might have a variety of different shapes that need to be considered. So when we model it, we're looking at, during the public health crisis, how throttled will solar contractors be in their ability to install, and is 50% deep enough? And then during the recovery, with additional solar incentives coming out in another stimulus, there's a different scenario from no solar incentives. And then is the economy going to recover more or less in Q4 to 2019 levels? Or is it going to be sometime in 2021 or later that we get that recovery? And there's no crystal ball for that right now. Analysts are saying different things every day about the shape of the recovery. So that all plays into the modeling. So our three scenarios basically are almost flat with last year is our best case, and down about 20% is our medium case, and down about 45% is our worst case for 2020 compared to 2019.
Okay, great. Thanks for that market update.
Yeah.
I'd like to switch gears now and set the stage for today's topic, remote selling and remote site assessments. And because of the COVID crisis, we're obviously very focused on this topic right now. But why do you think it's taken so long for us to talk about broad implementation of these virtual tools? Or do you think it's just temporary and we'll be back to face-to-face selling as soon as we can? Where would you like to see the industry go in terms of our move to these digital platforms?
So I would want to reframe that question, Tom, because I think there's a trap in thinking about digitalization or digital transformation as a strategy. And I think it's really valuable to see it more as a set of tools that support a strategy. So I would say we haven't made a lot of transition in construction in general and in solar in aspects of how we're digitally transforming the value chain, the customer experience, things like that. And I think that's fine. I think digital transformation happens in response to customer needs being reframed and understood in different ways by innovators. So if selling door to door works, then there's not a compelling reason to change it. But here we are in a pressure cooker that's forcing us to relook at that and figure out how to sell virtually, right? And likewise, the site assessment being reframed, and I know we're going to talk about that today. The purchasing process being reframed, the design process being reframed, permitting, right? All of those are opportunities for digital transformation, and I'm completely confident that they're going to be addressed according to the demand for them to be addressed in more transformed ways, and the innovators who are positioned to drive those transformations doing it. But really the key driver is customer experience and creating customer value. But digitizing a process when that process doesn't directly create customer value is only an efficiency move. And so saying we need an app or we need a tool or we need a whatever without thinking about the customer value that's driving doesn't necessarily result in the transformation that we look for. So I'm perfectly content with the rate of change in the solar industry. And I believe that the COVID crisis is going to drive a wave of transformations that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg now. I'm really excited to talk about virtual selling and remote site assessment as two kind of leading points in that process. But the whole value chain is really up for grabs now. And I think that's really exciting.
Right. Great. Thanks, Boaz. Appreciate your perspective. I'd like to now introduce our guests and get into the discussion. So we'll bring them up on the screen. And on the line, we have Michelle Spina. She's an instructional designer, trainer at SolarEdge. We have Joseph Maramati. He's the co-founder of Ipsen Solar in Washington, D.C. We've got Vaughn Woodruff. He's the founder and CEO of InSource Renewables. Shane Helly. He's the project manager at Porter Electric, LLC. And we have Benjamin Davis. He's a policy associate at CALSA, California Solar and Storage Association, and he can answer questions on permitting and other resources in California. So if you have questions for our panelists on remote selling, remote sales, and permitting questions, please add those in the chat, and you can also tweet them at Solar Town Hall, hashtag Solar Town Hall. And Vaughn, I'd like to start with you. And before I get to my first remote sales question, you and I chatted briefly on Monday, and you mentioned that you and your team had turned a corner, and you realized that now we're in a marathon and we're not in a sprint. What brought you and your team to that realization on Monday?
So, I mean, I think we started to show up a little bit last week. I think the first couple of weeks of this disruption was one in which things were new. Everyone's bonding together to pull together, make sure everybody's supported. And like human brain does, we start to get used to patterns and try and find normalcy. And I think people are realizing it's not all that normal to be sitting at home, not seeing people and having conversations. Right. We start to see just a little bit of how that's affecting everybody's just kind of outlook and et cetera. So, I think the big piece, as we talked about, is like, this is going to be a marathon. I mean, we're in a disruptive industry. We're used to dealing with disruption. I think this has been a particularly challenging disruption. And so, and I want to, thank you all for putting these together to kind of help all of us kind of talk through these things and see how other folks are dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, great to have you. So, InSource, your company, has a large service territory. And can you talk about your move to remote sales? What challenges were you trying to solve? What have you learned along the way?
Totally. So, we've been around for a bit over a decade, and early on, we're primarily in solar water heating, in which remote sales are really challenging because, it's not as plug and play as PV is. And, everybody's basement was a little bit different. And we spent a lot of time early on just going out and driving all over the place, where We're located in the second most rural congressional district in the country. We're the oldest state in the union, and so that technology challenges are there, distance challenges are there. And with solar water heating, just having to get out and see things to get accurate numbers was a really challenging piece for us. When I went out to a NABCEP conference, I think 5 years ago, and Solar Census was there, and Eagle View, and all these folks that were showing all these great tools for LiDAR data for solar mapping of roofs and being able to pull out measurements. And I was like, man, for our service territory, that looks like it's going to be awesome. And then it's like, yeah, you all aren't going to be building in rural Maine anytime soon, these databases, are you? And so, we had to figure out another way to do it. And Boaz is dead on his assessment of remote sales is, it's not really about the technology. It's really about how you utilize that technology for value for the customer. And so that early on, we first looked at it to say, what are the technological challenges that we have, especially being in a very rural area? And so we started since we don't have some of those other data sets, we started really doing digging and finding, property tax maps for municipalities or for the state, real estate photos that come up there, looking at real estate listings, everything that we could do to get as much information as possible at that site. The nice piece about what we do is, most of the things can be seen from outside. It's the electrical interconnection. And, as long as you narrow that down into that basket of, what you're likely going to run into, we're usually within a couple $100 on every remote sales proposal that we do. But at the end of the day, the big challenge wasn't the technology. It was, how do we take a population that's generally older, and our business is really built on trust. It's how do we use these tools to build trust. And so what we ended up doing with that was we really funneled our sales proposal pipeline to have a lot of tools in the background that get folks to somebody on the phone who's one of the most experienced folks in our company, depending upon the technology we're working with, early in the process, to have a conversation, to use those tools and realize the limitations of them so that we can say those, like, listen, 9 times out of 10, we can come out of this thing with a proposal that's going to be dead on, but, your house is particularly challenging. I can't see a street level view. The shading is a little bit, I could be off. And we tend to do something that a lot of salespeople would probably slap me aside the head to say, which is we're conservative early on. We'll give them a higher price early on because that trust factor is such a big piece. And then anytime building trust, it's really how you use that technology to listen and to hear priorities and to help the customer problem solve. Right. And as Boaz has talked about, the opportunities that we have here to really build, especially for smaller companies that are in market. I mean, Maine's a different market than California, where people are, no one's knocking on doors here. Yeah. But in those state markets, to differentiate with trust and expertise becomes a really good opportunity.
Yeah, along those lines, I want to come back to that trust question because I think that's really interesting when it comes to the digital tools. But Joe, I want to bounce over to you. You're in DC, so you're in a very different kind of region than Vaughn is. Can you talk about, what are your customers' priorities and how are you addressing them in the remote design and selling process?
Sure. Yeah, it was interesting listening to Vaughn because we're kind of in the opposite situation where we're in one of the densest parts of the country, lots of traffic, and we're serving DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So our office is located in central DC, but it sometimes can be 2 hours to go 20 miles to get to somebody's house. Right. So we've been doing remote selling since day one. And I think it's really a value add for everybody because we can convey the full value proposition to somebody and we can tell the story of the company and we don't have to schedule a time to come out to somebody's home. Where in the DC area, a lot of people are very busy, they have tight schedules, it's hard to get to their homes. So we've been selling since day one virtually on Zoom and Google Hangouts, and we've had good luck with it. I think our conversion rate is probably a little bit lower than it is in person. But like I said, we can convey the full value proposition and the story of our company really well virtually. And I think we can build trust too. So that part of the transition was pretty seamless because it's something we've been honing for a long time.
Yeah. Real quick, what are the tools that you're using in that initial assessment?
So we are using SolarGraph for our proposals, and it's a great tool because you can make changes in real time to the design. So
Mhm.
you can send a URL once you've designed a system to the customer, and if they want to move panels around, if they want to add panels, if they want to change equipment, you can do that on the installer side, and then they can refresh their screen and see the changes in price and design and layout on the customer side. So that's been a huge asset for us to be able to do virtuals because you can make changes so quickly and because a customer can see the changes you're making in real time. I mentioned Zoom and Google Hangouts. We also use EagleView. So using EagleView allows us to make sure that the design we're doing in SolarGraph matches up because EagleView shows the obstructions and all the measurements. So that's been huge. And then one thing we learned over time was that rather than jumping right into the proposal, we really needed to tell the story of the company because we're a B corporation, because we're an Amicus company, because we're Tesla certified. We have a good story to tell. So we put together a PowerPoint presentation that we begin every virtual presentation with. So we can tell the story of the company, what our values are, what
Right.
service we provide. So before we take 10 minutes to tell the story of the company, so we can share a little bit more about ourselves.
Great. Michelle, I'd like to go to you now. For someone not so familiar with remote sales, um, you know, taking what Joe was talking about, can you walk us through your recommendations for setting up that initial sales call? It seems like you were really focused on process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important to set the expectations with the customer on what that remote selling process will be. So that initial phone call with that customer is really around letting them know the duration of the call, 25 to 30 minutes in a comfortable setting that you're going to be non-distracted with. Tell them to have their webcam on. I'd love Joe's perspective as well, but I think in terms of these remote selling capabilities, people now are seeing that webcams are very helpful with building that trust initially. Also, getting utility usage prior. So, on that initial phone call, asking that customer to send over their usage is helpful so that preliminary proposals can be created. And really just setting those expectations with the customer. I think it's important too at that initial phone call to, if you have sent them a calendar invite for the appointment with the link to the virtual platform, whether you're using Zoom or Google, have them check it when you're on the phone with them for that initial phone call. So you're not having to deal with technical issues trying to get into the appointment when it's time for the appointment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those technical issues are a big question in my head, especially when I think about dealing with technical issues in my parents. Like if I was trying to sell my parents solar, like I don't know how I do it really. Um, Shane, I want to bounce over to you. Are you guys doing a bunch of remote sales, or is it still mostly face to face? What's your process there?
Yeah, I mean, when we do the initial call, I mean, all of us, right, use a design software typically with some kind of map service. In Central Illinois, they're not that accurate, so we do initial off of that. And
Uh-huh.
Street View, Zillow, wherever we can get information from them, but typically on the initial call, we are getting the utility. And then what I'm doing now is also, if I can, kind of have them help me do a soft survey of the area. Like if I can get pictures of their panel or maybe rafters, whatever they're comfortable with. Because I mean, it's each customer, but are they comfortable with us still coming to the home,
Yeah.
after we get to that point? And we are doing a remote for the sales right now, but I also agree that it does affect on the closes. I think having a salesperson that is good in person definitely closes more, but still, what is your customer comfortable with?
Yeah, Michelle, what pushback do you get from people about remote sales? Like, I can imagine some sales reps are like, there's no way I can close this
Mm-hmm.
deal without being face to face. What do you say to them?
I think that there's two opportunities that we need to realize right now, is that a lot of sales reps are used to not being able to meet with customers because of time constraints, or because of the fact that, we have objections all the time from customers. And the advantage we have right now is that these customers do have time to meet with us. So creating that, that environment that you can actually have a sales consultation with somebody over a virtual setting. Again, the webcam is very helpful. It's important to tell the sales reps, and this is what I tell them, you're not reinventing the wheel. I've talked to a lot of business owners in the past week, and they always go back to, this is not our business model. We're not going to move to it. Vaughn had a really good point that they need to realize that it is now a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think that a lot of business owners are still in the mindset that they're going to get back in the home soon. What we don't know is what, even after COVID, what impact this is going to have on people wanting others to come to their house. But again, the opportunity too is that smart energy in general is an innovative industry. So people are more, susceptible to being okay to get on a virtual platform. We also have the advantage with COVID right now that everybody's been forced to use a virtual platform in their work environment. So they may have not had the being comfortable on a virtual platform prior, and I agree with that. But now we all have to get on Zoom, whether we're an elementary school teacher, like Tom, you said your parents, I taught my mom how to use Zoom this weekend. And right. I think everybody's in that mindset right now. So we're at that advantage currently.
Cool. We just had a question come through from Brian about site efficiency. Joe, maybe I'll bounce this over to you. The question is, what are people using for site efficiency for remote designs and proposals? We use Pathfinder. I know you use Aurora, Joe. They say we haven't found Aurora. It's not accurate enough. What are you finding?
Actually, we're using EagleView, and we've been really happy with EagleView. So the way our process works is we use SolarGraph, which is pretty accurate, but we like to use EagleView to corroborate what we designed in SolarGraph because it has boundaries on it. It has the exact roof measurements, which we've found to be very reliable. It has where all the obstructions are. And then we put the file that we get, the CAD file from EagleView, into Solar Design Tool, which is another tool that you can use to do a layout that's a little bit more precise. And we've had great luck with that. We've seen our change orders go way, way down by selling in SolarGraph, but then confirming the design in a combination of EagleView and Solar Design Tool.
Cool. Vaughn, you mentioned in our chat on Monday that you had some alternative sources of data that you were collecting. Can you talk a little bit about those? Maybe those have applications for our attendees.
Sure. So folks who fall, like I said earlier, some of the databases and the other platforms don't necessarily play out for us. So a lot of, some of the larger municipalities will have databases in terms of property cards, things like that. They can be searched via GIS. In Maine, we actually have an aggregated one so that we can go through the whole state. And if the municipality has that, that can give us, some of this is also about putting folks with experience in that assessment role so that they, once you've seen enough of these homes or businesses and know, kind of the lay of the land for what the aerial looks like versus what it looks like on the ground when you get out there with a sun eye or something along those lines, that can be helpful. We use a lot of the Google products in terms of if Project Sunroof's around, we got a couple of municipalities that have that. That's free. I think, one of the things we talked about, Tom, is I think right now we're Yankees, we're tightwads. The thought of spending money at a time when things are uncertain, I think for folks is probably daunting with the unknown that's out there. And I think it's really important to vet and figure out, as you move into this, what tools can do the best work for you. And at the end of the day, it comes down to what the customer experience looks like and making sure that you can get the level of accuracy that you need to get there. Like I said, we do a lot of aerial. We looked at some of these others and found that off of some of the Google mapping programs, we can get measurements that are just as good as we need for what we're doing. Real estate listings, there are some even 2 to 3 year old listings that you can still get information off of out in the world. It's obviously not going to get you what's in the service panel, but it can get you, the 96% of the other costs in the system.
Right.
Be able to help figure that out.
Yeah, I think setting expectations is important with those things. I'd like to circle back to the idea of trust. Michelle, you shared your slide deck with me from your virtual sales training with SolarEdge, and I'm wondering why you think control and peace of mind, those were important ideas that you wanted to relay customers, especially in the virtual space. Why is that so important?
Yeah, I think it's less in the virtual space and more in the environment we're working in right now. A lot of sales representatives are getting the objection that, let's move forward when this all blows over. I think that's probably the biggest one right now. Like, let's let things settle down. Customers really need to realize that the energy bill is something you're always going to have to pay, regardless of the economic conditions or what's going on. And they want peace of mind with something. So being able to talk through peace of mind, I saw somebody in the chat mention battery. We're seeing a lot of success with people adding batteries onto that initial contract right now so that they can talk about, having backup power. So having control and peace of mind over your utility bill in a time that is somewhat unpredictable can be helpful in selling that value for the homeowner currently.
Cool. Shane, you mentioned doing a interior walkthrough with a customer, or at least they sent you photos. Do you see it playing out that we might be doing that in the coming years? We also got a question from Steve who mentioned how one of their customers took pictures in the attic and the electrical panel. I guess I have two questions. Is that something you picture doing in the future? And would you ever be comfortable going to contract with just that information that the customer is providing?
Yeah, if the pictures are clear, I think that can help a lot in us getting the cost right. Because with those pictures of their panel or their attic, you know more what you're getting into. And of course, we can do video, but if we're doing video of that, I'd rather it be recorded. Because at some point, I'm probably going to want to go back and go over that with the team before we actually roll out to the site. So I can definitely see us using that in the future.
Yeah. And what about on the contract side? Would you be comfortable going to contract with just that information?
Yeah, in the end, you could always do a change order. I prefer to have that information for the contract because if I don't actually see the wiring or what's going on, and then I get out there after the contract per se, and then as recently as October, I went in and took a panel cover off, and they had their wire undersized. So we had to actually already change out that service, but the sales guy had already signed the contract. So then, we had to work that out with the homeowner. So the more information I can get inside the house and what's going on with the attic and the wiring, the better, I think, for the contract.
Joe, Vaughn, any thoughts on that? Joe, maybe we'll start with you. Would you be comfortable going to contract with just preliminary information like that?
Well, we do contracts up front, and we use a fixed dollar per watt with whatever information we can garner from Google or EagleView, and then we'll do a change order afterward if we need to. And in most cases, there's no issue. Our change orders have gone down over time, like I mentioned. So, yeah, we've done several of these virtual site surveys and really not had any issue. The customers seem to enjoy it because they're engaged in the process and they're sort of learning a little bit about what's going to be involved in their solar system. And with the technology we've got today, we can usually get pretty clear pictures. We put together a slide deck that shows exactly what data we need. And we've actually been doing Google Hangout Zoom meetings where our PV designer will walk the customer through their own home so they can make sure they're getting very clear pictures of what we need. So far, so good.
Vaughn, do you have anything to add to that? I know you're probably working with a lot of older homes too.
Yeah. So, I think on the going to contract, we've done a number of solarized projects here in the state a few years back. And during one of them, we tried something out, which was a solar ready buyer program, which would give folks a discount if they went to contract prior to us coming out to a site visit, and then giving them an out in the contract should we find something that was, outside of a certain dollar amount or percentage in terms of performance. We found in that Solarize program that half of the folks took us up on that. Now, a Solarize project's a little bit different because of the trust and how those programs roll, but we rolled that into everything afterwards. And we find, I think probably 15-ish% of our customers do that. And so it gives them an incentive. They feel like they're getting a deal. It pulls people in as long as you're building a trust and showing them the really explicit back door. And you're providing that back door for yourself as well, right? If you get in there and it needs a service upgrade or the roof needs to be totally rebuilt. So yeah, there's some ways to go about it, I think, and really, again, add additional value for the customer.
Great. We had a comment from John in the chat. He says, if the salesperson is comfortable using remote platforms, the customer will also be comfortable. Helping the non-techie customer navigate the remote platform is a great way to build comfort and trust with the customer. I could see this really playing out. And I want to circle back with Michelle about that. But Joe, you're in DC. I think is the fact that you're using these modern virtual tools, scheduling appointments online, offering flexibility to your customers, is that by itself an indicator of trust, especially for younger people?
Yeah, I think so. It's always harder to build trust virtually than in person. But I think that's a great point. Anytime you can help somebody understand how to use a new platform, you're building trust and you're building that relationship. And on the virtual site survey, I've been encouraging my team to actually sell on it. So I don't think you necessarily need to provide a discount because it's something that customers so far have been really happy to help with. They feel like they're engaged in the process. They're making the project go faster. They don't have to stay home from work in the pre-COVID world, so they can, actually do it on their own time. So far that's been really good, and it does move projects faster because you don't have to schedule a time for someone to come out.
Michelle, for people that, maybe for older people who aren't as tech savvy, what are your recommendations for sales folks to help initially, start those conversations, get them rolling? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I really agree with Joe in that, it does help to build trust when they have that type of virtual platform along with the customer. It's really important for those ones that are not as tech savvy to slow down the process, really talk them through how it's going to work. And I think that as sales consultants, we need to understand that it's not everybody that's going to be able to jump on a webcam quickly. It's not everybody that's going to be able to, we still have customers that don't have emails, right? So there might be people this might not work for. And we need to focus on the ones that it will work for, but also, hey, if webcam doesn't work out for somebody, we can still do the screen share. We can still send things through email and walk them through stuff. So there's different levels of technical skill that we can work with. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be, on a webcam, really tech savvy. If we just walk through it slowly, make sure to pace along with that customer.
Great. So as we approach the end of our program, I'd like to bring Ben Davis up real quick from CalSA. He offered to share some slides on solar permitting numbers in California in the past few weeks, and then we'll let a few more questions come in through the chat, and we'll come back to those if we have time. But Ben, are you able to share your screen and share a few of those numbers with us?
Yes.
And then I have a one or two follow-up questions for you as well.
Cool. Are you seeing my screen?
We are, yeah, great.
Great. So this is a snapshot of data. So Ben Davis, California Solar and Storage Association. We are, unlike the other panelists, we are not a solar company. We are the trade group for solar companies in California. Thank you to Tom for having me on. Just here's a quick snapshot of permitting statewide in California. So the graph that you're seeing is not, it's not everything in the state. Rather, the permitting data for specific AHJs, the ones you see below the graph, were pulled and then tabulated into the graph. So the key numbers and what you see on the horizontal axis, the date figures, those are the dates for the start of the week, not the end. So the last data point we have are the data for last week. And as you can see, permitting was highest the first week of March, and then it fell by second week of March was when, at least in California, we had the statewide stay-at-home order. Permitting fell, and then it fell again at the first week of April. A lot of this is due to the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. Permitting really went off a cliff. This is because the Bay Area was the first place in California to institute their own stay-at-home orders, and then on March 31st, they implemented even stricter stay-at-home orders. There's places like San Francisco, Fremont, Oakland, where permitting really ground to a halt. They weren't doing any solar permits, and then even once they restarted, only on a case-by-case basis. And then here's a quick snapshot from outside the Bay Area. What we are seeing is a lot of jurisdictions are similar to what we're seeing in places like Stockton, San Diego, and Fresno, where the week that there was a stay-at-home order, the number of permits being issued really plummeted. This was in part because AHJs were closing their doors, and it was taking them a while for them to, in some cases, taking a while for them to go online with permitting. And then also, as probably you know better than I do, solar companies took a step back, reevaluated how to change processes to maintain social distancing guidelines, maybe one person, one truck, et cetera, and then they reopened. So that is a snapshot of what we're seeing across the state.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. As a quick follow-up to that, are you seeing, and would you mind stopping your screen share real quick? Do you see us moving forward and AHJs adopting more remote tools like we're seeing now? Do you see that being an ongoing thing?
Yeah, so the good news is that at least in California, prior to COVID, there was one or two jurisdictions that were using virtual inspections. Now we have a couple dozen jurisdictions that are doing virtual inspections, mostly that are live videos with Google Duo or FaceTime or Skype. And then to answer your question on whether or not, your question was whether or not this will continue.
Yeah.
Post-COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely think that is a possibility. There's some jurisdictions that really like going online. Other jurisdictions have told me this is really just temporary for COVID. So it varies across the board. I will say that when the legislature returns, there's going to be a lot of focus on where to put stimulus dollars. And I think there's an opening there to send money to building departments to get them to modernize and do things like go online for accept permit applications online, issue permit applications online, allow payments online. So there might be an opportunity to actually get funding for that. And then NFPA, which, as folks know, they make the NEC, they are coming out with a guidance for video inspection. And so that's really great. So you can see some jurisdictions that they get used to video inspection today. the pandemic is over, they say, all right, we're going to go back to in-person video inspection, and then the NFPA guidance comes out, and and now there's a national code making body saying, hey, here are the ways that you can do virtual inspection safely. There's probably a number of AHJs that will look back and say, oh, virtual inspection, when we did it, that wasn't so bad, and now there's this national guidance and this national code making body providing us a path forward. We should reconsider
Very cool.
and maybe go virtual.
Great. Thanks for that insight, Ben. Really appreciate it. I want to take just one or two more questions. Shane, I wanted to bounce it over to you. Do you use drones in your remote selling? What tools are you using for that?
Yes. I'm in Central Illinois, not DC, so I do work in a lot of small towns where map services don't really make a whole lot of sense. So initially we might use, Google Maps or what have you, but then I do end up rolling out with a drone. I actually have one right here, just DJI Maverick Pro Platinum. So what I do is, and what's nice, I guess, with that in this situation is I can go out to the home, but obviously I can keep a distance from the homeowner, and everyone can be comfortable. And then with the drone, I can get accurate dimensions, and with Scanify, make a 3D model that then I can actually send a link to them, and they can check out what the solar will look like on the roof, which is really fun for the customer. And like I said, it does give me accurate dimensions, so I don't have to actually get up there and make sure that the dimensions are correct. So that's nice. It saves time. Like I said, it's fun for the customer, and it's also, helps with safety issues of having more people on the roof.
Great. I want to try to squeeze in one or two more questions. Maybe we'll throw this one to you, Vaughn. We have a question on the engineering side and getting structural plans stamped. Have there been any hiccups with that for those maybe virtual site surveys?
We're in Maine. There are no structural permitting that really goes on up here. There's a little bit, so we haven't run into that too much. It is one of those pieces. That's my background, structural engineering, and it's sometimes you have to get your eyes on it, especially depending upon the age of the housing stock. We've run into some stuff where things might look fine, and there was a really bad ridge detail that blew that roof for even putting solar on it. So that is definitely one of those, pitfalls you got to watch out for as you're going through this.
Cool. Great. Ben, we had another question come in for you. How much of a difference is there in commercial versus residential and new construction versus PV retrofit?
There's three categories: resi retrofit, new construction, and then commercial.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I think I was trying to follow the chat. First off, the ohm data is actually residential and commercial that I was showing on the screen. Regarding residential retrofits, at least in California, a couple of years ago, California passed AB 2188, which streamlined permitting for small systems. And for systems smaller than 10 kW, all jurisdictions were supposed to have an online permitting process or a fast over-the-counter process. So for jurisdictions that have implemented that, it's, those online systems are mostly still up and running. So I think the residential that we are seeing is at least for small systems is still chugging along. For commercial, I would say, and I think what I've been hearing might slightly disagree with what I've been seeing in the chat, but for jurisdictions where in the past you had to take for the commercial system, you had to take like Los Angeles City, for example, you could take your commercial plans in, get your permit over the counter. Now you can't do that anymore. You have to submit your plans online. it has to go through more hoops, takes a couple weeks. So I'm hearing that commercial systems, because they're bigger, more complicated, and moving those online, issuing those permits is happening a little slower, but to each jurisdiction their own, and things vary across the board. And then in terms of new construction, I honestly have not heard much, but all of the shelter-in-place orders pretty clearly carve out exceptions for new construction specifically. And there is a real effort that building departments are making to get new homes permitted, especially for affordable housing. So I would expect that solar permitting for new home construction, that's not being impacted. And in fact, oftentimes those permits are just part of the permit for the entire, are getting wrapped up in the permit for the entire house.
Very cool. Thanks, Ben. So I'd like to start to close out here, and I do want to end our session on a little bit of mindfulness and kick it over to Krista. She's been doing this for the last few weeks, but I think now in the time that we're in, we could all just charge right ahead and then forget about taking care of ourselves and what taking care of ourselves means for our ability to take care of others, for our families, for our employees, and all of that. So Krista, I think we only have a few minutes, but I do want to continue with your segment. So yeah, would you please take it away for us?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tom. So we have been kind of going down a bit of a journey in these segments. So first talking about with this pandemic, how can we help people on the front lines with making sure that we're doing our best to stay healthy? Then talking about other aspects of health beyond physical health. So mental, emotional, psychological health, all of those things. We had our first mindfulness practice last week, and we talked a little bit about that as a self-care tip. But now I want to go into a bit more about how mindfulness is beneficial beyond the act of self-care. So there's a great podcast featuring Jim Detmer. We shared it throughout our company. We can share it in the show notes as well. But he introduces the concept of a horizontal line. So this does tie into mindfulness, and I hope you all will stay with me on this. But if we look at this horizontal line, at any point in the day, we can be above it or we can be below it. So if we're operating below the line, hopefully you guys can read my notes here. Things like anger, shame, and fear kind of operating reactively from those places. If we're operating above the line, we're operating from a place of love and curiosity. I don't know about all of you, but my base level of stress is higher with everything that's going on, and I am more often finding myself operating out of frustration, being a little bit more short-tempered, those types of things. So with this idea of a mindfulness practice, being able to identify where I'm at and stop and say, do I want to approach this from a different way is really beneficial. So in this podcast with Jim Detmer, he walks through 3 different questions to ask yourself and kind of how to evaluate what's going on. So the first question is, am I above the line or below the line at any moment? And this takes a little bit of emotional intelligence, which I think mindfulness can help out with, being able to identify where we're at. When you're identifying if you're above or below the line, thinking about, am I approaching this from shame or frustration or fear? Am I approaching this from love or curiosity? Then the second question is really the hardest one. Can I accept myself for being where I am? If you can't expect yourself, or if you can't accept yourself for being where you are, then you just kind of pile on and you kind of go farther below the line. So being able to say, this is where I am, I accept it. And then you can move on to the third question. How do I approach this from above the line instead of where I currently am? Looking from above the line or approaching it from above the line is really a place of authenticity, vulnerability, and candor is a key indicator of being above the line. So in this situation, it could be, tying it into the conversation we're having about the virtual site assessments or virtual selling. How can I best support my customer through this time using this platform? What kind of outcomes can I shoot for here instead of, well, how are we supposed to sell if we can't talk to a customer? But reframing that and coming from above the line and approaching it that way, I think is really beneficial. So I'm going to keep encouraging you guys to practice mindfulness and thinking about that, because there are other implications around innovation and creativity that I think it can open us up to.
Great. Thank you very much, Krista. Appreciate that. So just a few notes, and then I want to kick it over to Boaz to close it up. Thanks, first of all, to all of our panelists today, Michelle Spina from SolarEdge, Shane Helly, Joe Marhamati, Vaughn Woodruff, and Ben Davis. We really appreciate you coming on. This was, I think, a really great conversation. A lot of interesting points came up, and I think we could definitely do the same segment again. We got a lot of questions coming through. And for the audience, if your questions didn't get answered in the chat, we'll try to we'll answer them directly in our follow-up. So a quick reminder that BayWa RE and UNIRAC have partnered together to offer free solar contract permitting services through May 15th, 2020. You can learn more by emailing permits@unirac.com. And our next mindfulness session, like the one Krista mentioned, is this Friday at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. And you can check out our website, solar-distribution.com, and we'll send out that info in the follow-up as well, along with the podcast that Krista mentioned. So Boaz, would you please wrap us up? Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. I'll be brief. As it has been for the last couple of weeks, it's an honor to be with all of you, both presenters and speakers, and all the attendees who made time today to join us and ask great questions. As Tom said, any questions that didn't get answered are being captured, and we're going to do our best to answer those offline. I loved, anybody who works with me knows that I'm always looking for the big themes or the model that ties content together. And my big takeaway from today was about how digital tools are an opportunity to create trust with customers. And I think Michelle made a great point about how we set expectations and fulfill them as a way of building trust. And there were some other great comments and also about linking digital resources and non-digital resources, like having an expert salesperson supporting the digital process and making sure that the customer touch points that need human connection for any number of reasons get that. And the digital touch points are supporting customer value creation and building trust in other ways. And I loved the participant comment about how introducing digital tools to a customer who might not be comfortable with them is also an opportunity to build trust. So that's what I'm taking away from this session. There were a lot of specific tools mentioned, and I'm sure many of you are interested in those. And I'm walking away with really, this is all about trust, and consumers are putting their energy strategy in your hands. You're putting your business strategy in our hands, and we all need to think about how we build and reinforce trust in that process. So that's it for me. Thank you all very much again, and I'm looking forward to next week.